Hello again. I'm back. I had an interruption, so I wanted to finish reading to you about Princess Anne Royale, the very first Princess Anne. I'm going to just show you the picture of her. She was the very first Princess Anne Royale. She was the daughter of George II, and it is being written by Helen Cathcart. She has a book out there. I think it's such a valuable read for anybody interested. As I've mentioned before, you can get this book downloaded on Audible. It's only 1 credit, and it's a wonderful, interesting read. It does take a bit to understand the history of the different Princess Royals, but it helps you understand the distinction. And this part I'm reading about the Stuarts and the Hanover Princess Royals. There's only 7 of them, and Anne is the current holder, and it's not an automatic styling. So, but this section here I'm reading, which is a bit of history on the very first Princess Royale. So, and they were all very fascinating. So, what I'm going to do is read to you. Fortunately, in contrast to the excitements of their first reception, the two sisters went to live in the pastoral calm of Kensington Palace. When in the green fields beyond London, every hour of Anne's day was regulated as carefully as a Hanover clock. It was directed that she would rise at 7, pray, eat breakfast, and walk from 8 till 9, read, and then commence lessons, dining at 1 and then playing shuttlecock, but first walking or talking of sensible things. At an early age, moreover, she was taught to play on the clavichord, and music soon became her great passion. When only 8 or 9 years old, she clearly merited a skilled music master, and none other than Handel was appointed at a salary raising of £200 a year. If this stipend appeared handsome in those days, it was because but a fraction of those £19,000 provided for the princess's joint establishment, and it was no more than £200 annually and allowed for the office of laundress, a sum additional to £100 paid through the linen room to a German who does the work. It compares with £60 expended for a lace-trimmed suit of bibs, aprons, cap, and ruffles for Anne's little sister, and such petty expenses of the nursery occupants as tuning the harpsichord and food for their birds. Handel nevertheless enjoyed his own small perquisites, and from the lessons improvised for Princess Anne, he concocted the suite of pieces for the clavichord, which figured in 1720 as his first purely instrumental album to be published. It is pleasant to visualize the 35-year-old master of music at Kensington in ruffles and bulky velvet on his way to the 5 o'clock session with his young pupil strolling through the arcade walk of the palace. And it is still called the Princess's Court. Whenever their parents proposed to spend time at Kensington Palace, however, the children were hurried off to St. James to be brought back only when the Prince and the Princess of Wales had returned to their establishment at Richmond Lodge or Leicester House. On the stubborn issue of the custody of his grandchildren, the king, he adopted an attitude that was harsh and unreal, and it was obstinate that the natural parents were not permitted to spend a day with their daughters. The king's judges were called to decide the issue of guardianship, and though some resigned, the majority asserted in the king's favor that a grandfather was indeed the appropriate protector. The Victory Channel. His point 1. The king appeared lenient. and Caroline was allowed to visit the girls once a week, provided there was no fuss. Princess Anne would wait in the window for first sight of a sedan chair, which was carried out without guards or retinue, with the Princess of Wales ordinarily reduced to using it for conveyance. The bereft mother poured out an anguish of these occasions in a spare letter to her cousin in Paris, the Duchess of Orleans, often scribbling letters of 25 pages and one week as many as 43 pages. The harassed Duchess could scarcely cope with the flood of letters. She said, "It takes all my time, you can imagine," she told in a less emotional correspondent. Inevitably, the king's strictness led to pretenses and subterfuge, and young Anne could not help but be embroiled in deception. In the summer of 1718, after not seeing her father for 6 months, she secretly sent him a basket of cherries, which she and her sister helped pick from the Kensington gardens. The prince broke down and wept when he found hidden in the fruit a message that their heart and soul and thoughts were always with their dear papa. Shortly afterwards, Princess Anne herself fell ill with the dreaded symptoms of smallpox, and her mother rushed to Kensington Palace only to find, according to Lady Cowper, that the two Turks, Mohammed and Mustafa, sternly barred her away. In desperation, Caroline sought an audience with the king, merely to be rebuffed with the message that he himself had appointed a physician. In her agitation, she wrote an utterly submissive letter, and it was only then that the king consented. She might go, provided she should take neither doctor nor physician. Eventually, Caroline was permitted to nurse her daughter back to health, and taking heart from this success, Prince George also wrote submissively to his parents. Father and son duly met. The prince could make little of his father's angry mutterings except the words, "Your conduct, your conduct." Yet the breach was healed and the quarrel was patched up. Princess Anne recovered, disfigured not too much, and there was a notable sequel. Princess Caroline chanced to hear from the author, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, of the success of the surgeons of Constantinople in practicing inoculation. And being restored to favor, she persuaded the king to reprieve 5 criminals from the scaffold, provided they are submitted to the needle as a test. The experiment was successful. The princess had her younger daughters, Emily and Caroline, inoculated, and the scourge of smallpox, which had carried off so many the princess's heroines of our tale, flinched in defeat at last. Okay, this is part 3. As I said once before, each section of these Princess Royals in the chapter has a part in it. So this is part 3. Princess Anne was 17 when George I flew into his last rage and had a stroke in his coach at Osnabruck, and the news reached Kensington that her parents were at last the king and the queen. In the next month or two, Handel must have been enlivened her music hours by placing before her the dazzling anthems and marches which he composed for the coronation. Almost as fast as they flowed from his pen, not long before, Handel had been given a recital at the newly enlarged organ at St. Paul's Cathedral for the princess and her mother, clearly demonstrating that there is no more accomplished organist in England, if not in all of Europe. Now the great anthem Zadok the priest, since played at every coronation from George II to Elizabeth II, the first rehearsal before the new Princess Royal Anne. After the ceremony in Westminster Abbey, that arch witness, Mrs. Delaney, enthused over the enchantments of the Princess Royale and her two younger sisters walking beneath the royal canopy carrying the Queen's diamond-spangled train. They were dressed in stiff-bodied gowns and silver tissues. It was embroidered with silver trimming with diadems on their heads. Purple mantles edged with ermine and vast long trains. They were prettily dressed and looked very well. It was useless for the Lord Hervey to sneer that the glitter had been borrowed from the jeweler. Anne celebrated her 18th birthday the following week. In the feasts, the fetes, the masquerades, the court balls, and drawing rooms that marked the new reign, she found herself at the center of attention. It was hardly surprising if it all went a little to her head after the cloistered years in Kensington. Although she now had a younger brother, aged 6, as well as 5 sisters, she had always found herself senior in precedence of the junior set. Now she realized all too well that the heir to the throne, to the flattery and richness and prestige, was her elder brother Fred, who was in Germany, whom she could scarcely remember. "I would gladly die tomorrow," she said impulsively, "if I could be the Queen today," and the phrase never ceased to be repeated and maliciously distorted. Far from being too deeply envious of her brother, the princess could hardly wait to see him, puzzled because his arrival from Hanover was so long delayed. The new king was, in fact, as distrustful of his heir as his own father had been. Royal Anne was prevailed on to pass the time by taking to waters at Tunbridge Wells, enjoying the shops and the morning crush of the Pantiles, though the press of people was far from crushing their when gentlemen with white wands preceded her to ward off the over-inquisitive. Her Highness's charms everybody by her affable and courteous behavior, gushed Dr. Arbuthnot. She is the strongest person in the place. If walking every day was to be a sign of strength, I tell her Highness, she does more good than the waters, for she keeps some ladies in exercise and breath that want is. The following month, Anne warded off her puppy. The following month, Anne warded off her puppy fat still more vigorously by hunting, riding hounds so violently that she quite frightened her sister. P.S. We are just come back from hunting and in good health. Emily thankfully concluded a letter to her governess, Lady Portland, but their long-lost and long-awaited brother arrived in December. A prodigy of amiable sensibility who delighted Anne by showing that he fully shared her love of music and quickly pleased Mr. Handel by organizing the sisters into a juvenile court of orchestra. Frederick played the cello to Anne's harpsichord, and a charming old painting shows them scraping away. Frederick with his cello, and Anne at the keyboard, and Emily with her lute. Fred added a manly and youthful note of gaiety to the court. Mrs. Delaney particularly enjoyed a ball for Queen Caroline's birthday. The squeezing and the crowding being buffeted about and crushed. The clocks struck 12. The French dances were just over, and every man took the woman he liked best to dance country dances. The prince set the example by choosing the Duchess of Bedford. Mrs. Delaney scarcely noticed the man with whom Anne danced. So eagerly was she noting her toilet. Princess Royal had quite embroidered with gold and few colors intermixed. On another occasion, the prince surprised the queen and all his dear sisters with a very pretty entertainment at Richmond. The highlight of the evening was a play acted for their delight upon the lawn. On Princess Anne's 21st birthday, Fred similarly engaged John Rich, the impresario of the Gays, the Beggars' Opera, to produce a masque in the Dutch garden of the little palace at Kew. Over 1,000 lamps, disposed in an elegant manner, may have warded off some of the late October chill. The entertainment concluded with fireworks, cascading to cries of family delight, and the universal spectator remarked, "Their Royal Highnesses were pleased to express their satisfaction." These were the good days when it seemed nothing could ever mar the happy reunion of brother and sister. But their fervent emotions cooled rapidly. The prince was quickly at odds with his father over debts and money, and with his mother too. And during one of the queen's visits to Germany, when the queen was appointed regent instead of himself, Princess Anne found that she preferred to take her parents' part during the family rows. Disenchantment set in, and the atmosphere soured noticeably. Youthful rivalry also sparked off differences between the new Princess Royale and the new Prince of Wales, and everyone took sides when their squabbles blazed in the public eye and ears in the absurd vendetta that became known as the Opera War. See, I mean, Prince Harry and Prince William and all the drama that goes on. I mean, it happened with between Charles and Prince Andrew. I mean, they're little brotherly squabbles, so it happens in every generation. The king enjoyed the majestic and measured music of Handel. The prince preferred the lighter, the less calculable airs of the new Italian opera. It was old, perennial story of entrenched authority and rebellious youth, of established taste and decided innovations. The Princess Royal attempted to encourage her music master into novel experiment with his own established field. She heard with enthusiasm of his presentation of a biblical concert story, the story of Esther in a hospitable tavern, the Crown and the Anchor, complete with a choir of the Chapel Royal, and suggested staging it with costumes and a scenery of the new King's Theatre in the Haymarket. If Anne seemed weak in what might today be called social conscience, her musical conscience was sturdy indeed, and with her help, Handel's Esther was produced as the first public performance of oratorio in England. A month or two later, the king and the queen and the Princess Royal attended the first night of Deborah, an oratorio or sacred drama, but the Prince of Wales was poignantly absent. The feud deepened when Fred instituted a new opera company of his own at the theater in Lincoln's Inn Fields, financed by the Duke of Marlborough and other allies, and his producer slyly stole Handel's singers one by one. While Princess Anne and her parents sometimes sat in the draughty Theatre Royal, surrounded by empty seats, the crowd jostled wildly on the steps of Lincoln's Inn. The operas became the rallying grounds of the king's or the prince's factions, those who were for the king and his ministers versus those who supported the prince in his opposition tactics. The delight of everybody's heart seems to be the set upon the king's sitting by himself, wrote Lady Germain to the Duke of Dorset. The prince was as eager and pressed me as earnestly to go to Lincoln's Inn Field Opera as if it had been a thing of great moment to the nation. With far heavier sarcasm, the Prince Royal said that she expected in a little while to see half the House of Lords playing in the Princess's Theatre in their robes and coronets. Yet the bitter intensity of the quarrel all but ruined Handel, and especially the dire loss of his principal singers. The rivalry came to an end only with the comparatively unexpected appearance of a suitor for Princess Anne's hand. The princess was 25 and had begun to wonder whether she would ever marry or remain feuding for the rest of her life. For the court gossip, the surprise factor about her prospective husband was not that he was yet another Prince William of Orange, but that he was so very ugly. The grandnephew of William the Orange, who had ruled Britain jointly with Mary, and some 40 years earlier, his appearance dashed any romantic anticipations. For the would-be bridegroom was swarthy, short, and ill-shaped in features and undeniably a hunchback. It was a miserable match, shrieked Lord Hervey, while another chronicler found the aspirant so mal-informed as to seem from behind that he had no head, and from the front as if he had no legs. The Queen herself almost washed her hands of the affair, intimating that it was solely her daughter's choice. I never said a least word to encourage her or to dissuade her. But crowds loyally cheered the Dutchman's coach, even on its way to the wrong opera house. Parliament voted the princess in the joint venture of £80,000, but even with this relief to his purse, the king had second thoughts on contrasting the dream and the reality, the beauty and the beast, and kindly told Anne that a betrothal need not go forward if she wished to change her mind. Anne's response was a firm, "I would marry him if he were a monkey." The king dryly replied that there was a monkey enough. Happily, the quarrel between brother and sister was outwardly healed when Frederick good-naturedly took William in hand to show him the sights of London. Whatever the exterior, the Prince of Orange had a great charm of manner, and he had a heart of gold, and even the cynical Hervey had to agree that a wife would grow accustomed to the figure of her husband. While the marriage arrangements were going forward, it also happened that the Prince Fred, fell ill, and the world had an opportunity of true insight into the Princess Anne's affections. She had formerly shunned her brother, as she said, to show her disapproval of setting oneself at the head of a faction of fiddlers. Now she visited his sickbed nearly every day, displaying a depth of affection that curiously made the king downcast and jealous. Meanwhile, Handel, of course, he composed a wedding anthem, and the wedding eve was notable for a gala performance at the Haymarket of an opera notably attended not only by the intending bride and groom and the king and the queen, but also by the convalescent Prince of Wales. The next day, the gorgeous extravagance of the wedding showed that George II had spared no expense. The Chapel Royal of St. James, we are told, It was fitted with an extreme good taste, and as much finery as velvets, gold, and silver tissue, galleons, fringes, and tassels, gilt lustres, and sconces. The bride, with her 8 train bearers, dressed alike in white and silver with great quantities of jewels, is acclaimed by some authorities to have inaugurated the lasting fashion of having bridesmaids. The reception afterward was all that Mrs. Delaney, for one, could have hoped for. Such crowding, such finery I never saw. The custom was still observed of guests being invited to see the bride and groom sitting up in bed. And once again, history is obliged to Lord Hervey, who considered that the Princess Royale had a lively, clean look and a fine complexion, and thought that the Prince of Orange looked less shocking and ridiculous than one could have expected. Okay. We are on to the next section, just a few more pages. But this section is called Part 4. As for the third time, with the century, a princess of Britain, a Princess Royale, sailed the North Sea to become the chatelaine of the House of Orange, and the faithful wife of the stateholder. Her father, it was waspishly said, he gave her 1,000 kisses upon departure, but not 1 guinea. Her mother never ceased crying for 3 days, and her brother deliberately took no leave of her, as he explained to the Prince of Orange, for fear of upsetting her too much. From the moment of the wedding until they sailed for Gravesend, moreover, it was noticed that Princess Anne always behaved to her husband as if he had been an Adonis, turning towards him whenever he spoke, hanging on to his every word, and applauding everything he said to anyone else. People found it most extraordinary that she made prodigious court to him. The pattern of history also repeated itself, for the Princess Royale outlived her husband, and after providing an heir, as the first Princess Mary of Orange had done, the Princess Royal Anne was also the direct ancestor of Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. Her marriage, though it lasted only the span of 17 years, it was an exceptionally happy one. Her genuine fondness for her husband became proverbial, and their only public tiffs arose from her extreme jealousy of other women, a jealousy invariably without cause. Her brother, poor Fred, affected mock annoyance because she had married before him, but he married the 17-year-old Princess Augusta of Saxe-Gotha. 2 years later, with a wedding that his sister might have planned to the last organ note, complete with Handel anthem, Anne continued to use her influence to help the composer in any difficulty. They probably met again in 1737 when, too ill to compose a tribute in honor of her 10th year as Princess Royale, he journeyed to Aix-la-Chapelle to take to the waters. Music, his old pupil found, mixed well with marriage and maternity. She formed her own small chamber of orchestra at The Hague, which she directed from the harpsichord in frequent palace concerts. Singers from London were invited to Holland, including Handel's celebrated favorite soprano, Anna Maria Strada. Eager to oblige the Princess of Orange with the last news and gossip, the Daily Post announced Anna Maria set out for the Breda just a month after the Princess of Wales had given birth to the boy who was to be King George III. Probably she was able to tell Princess Anne that the proud young father's own love of music at this time led to the making of a double keyboard harpsichord, the splendid instrument that is still at Windsor Castle, and she may have hinted that the temper of his father, the king, remained uncertain as ever. Anne herself had 2 children. She had a son and a daughter, both with such difficulty that it became touch and go whether the doctors could save her life. Alarmed at the prospect of having her first child among strangers, she returned to England for the first lying in, but found the king to be in one of his moods that Anne called the devil to everybody that comes near him. Indeed, he inhospitably proposed that she had better not stay. Often his household could find no reason for his ill humor, though Anne was always more understanding. "My God," she said to Hervey one day, "I'm ashamed for you, who have been so long about papa, that you know so little of him. In his worst humors, it is always because one of his pages has powdered his periwig ill, or a housemaid has set a chair where it doesn't use to stand." But George soon began snapping so angrily at every mention of her name that she thought it was best for her to leave, if only for the sake of domestic peace. During the subsequent stormy sea crossing, sheer fright brought on false labor pains, and the ship returned to Harwich. But the king remained gruffy and adamant, and she again set out, this time to be met safely by her husband and to give birth in Holland to a son. When her husband, Prince William of Orange, duly succeeded his father as the ruler of Netherlands, it was rumored before long that Anne was the power behind the regal chair. Certainly she could draw on a fund of common sense and expertise in the problems of worthy Dutch burghers. She learned statecraft at her mother's side when Queen Caroline acted as regent during George II's annual visit to Hanover. And it was no coincidence that Prince William's 10-year rule in Holland turned out to be an era of untroubled prosperity. Prince William died in 1751, only a month before Frederick, the Prince of Wales, and perished of a chill and of a double stroke of fate. Anne lost both her husband and her brother. Her people in Holland nonetheless elected her without hesitation to the position of gouvernante, or regent, for the 7-year-old heir. Thus Anne's adolescent dream of ruling a country and being queen, in a sense, it came true. Now when she heard of her father's worst tantrums, she could snub his ambassador, and the king, in retaliation, never paid her a visit during his journeys to Hanover. Frederick the Great of Prussia had to spare her some attention to ensure that the English forces fighting the French were not loaned troops from Holland. And evidently, Frederick found personal ground for admitting her knowledge and her character when she helped guide him around the art galleries of various rich Dutchmen during his visit to Holland in 1756. In her last illness, her physicians could not but admire the strength which she had read and signed the marriage contract for her daughter's union to the Prince of Nassau-Weilburg, and letter to the States General requesting their consent for the match. The Prince Royal Anne died on 12 January 1759. She died in London. No, she died on 12 January 1759. But in London, Handel heard with sadness the last tidings of his fond pupil. And old and overweight, weary and blind, he followed her to the grave 3 months later. Okay, this is a little... I'm just going to finish up reading the last part, the synopsis, so to speak, that leads you into the next Princess Royale. For 30 years more, in the mid-18th century, there was no Princess Royale under warrant. From Anne in 1759 until Charlotte Augusta in 1789, the distinction lay awarded, though not in fact disused. In 1760, a fair and good-looking bachelor of 22 was proclaimed the king. This was George II's grandson, George III, the son of the demised Frederick, Prince of Wales. He was destined to reign, though not always to rule, for longer than any other king in English history. 7 of his sons survived infancy, and he had 6 daughters. It was a plethora of great aunts for young Queen Victoria. George III was not a long bachelor. He deferred his coronation until a queen could be crowned at his side. The 17-year-old Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, she was betrothed to him by proxy within 6 months of his accession. She had never traveled much farther than her father's garden in Strelitz. She arrived in London on 17 September 1761, and she was wedded that same evening. The coronation of George III and his Queen Charlotte took place 2 weeks later. Their first child, the future George IV, he was born 11 months later and created the Prince of Wales within a week. Then came another son and another, and it was not until 5 years of marriage that their 4th child proved to be a daughter. She was named Charlotte, Augusta Matilda after her mother and grandmother, but it was not until more than 20 years later that George III officially gave his eldest daughter this title of Princess Royale. And that is the end. And I will take a break from that, and I will read Princess Charlotte in the next section.